Welcome to What She Said, the heartbeat of Canadian women's voices, with me, your host, Candace Sampson. Here, we dive deep into the raw, unfiltered stories and triumphs of women from coast to coast. This isn't just a podcast, it's a movement where empowerment and education collide and where mansplaining is shown the door. We're here to celebrate, uplift, and echo you. So get cozy, tune in, and let's embark on this journey together, exploring the rich tapestry of women's lives, their battles and victories, right here on What She Said. Well, it's Thanksgiving in Canada, and this year, like all years, I'm grateful to not be American. Because honestly, how do they celebrate Thanksgiving a mere 4 weeks before Christmas? No, thank you. I love Thanksgiving in October, where the pressure of the holidays is not yet felt and nature is bursting with color and celebration. I'm also thankful for you. I am one person behind this mic, driven by a mission to spotlight phenomenal Canadian women week after week, because you deserve to know about their greatness and significance so that it inspires your greatness and significance. You can't be what you can't see. So I hope that you see how amazing you are today and every day. So thank you for listening. I'm eternally grateful. Now here's what's coming up. October 18th is Persons Day in Canada, marking the historical recognition of women as persons. Today, I'm chatting with Kadie Philp, founder of the Garden of Even, who takes deep dives into overlooked women's histories and challenges the narratives that have often marginalized women's achievements. Kadie will share insights on Persons Day and the impactful stories from the Garden of Even. And Brodie is in with new entertainment. And if you can stomach it, there's a new movie about Donald Trump in theaters, an even better documentary that brings receipts that one of the greatest presidents of all time, Abraham Lincoln, was gay. And Ali Wong is both funny and raunchy in her new comedy special, Single Lady. The fascination for women with true crime never wanes, and understanding the why behind heinous acts draws many of us in. Joining me are Christy and Melissa from the Buried Motives podcast. These neighborhood patrollers turned podcasters bring a mix of empathy and inquisitiveness to their exploration of chilling cases. We'll discuss their journey into podcasting, the special resonance true crime holds for many women, and how they balance respect for the victims with the intrigue of dissecting these grim narratives. And as we edge closer to cold and flu season, bolstering our defenses becomes top of mind. Dr. Colleen Hartwick, a naturopathic doctor, is here to offer expert advice on strengthening our immune systems and keeping our families healthy as we face a slew of respiratory threats, including new COVID variants. This important conversation is part of our ongoing series sponsored by New Roots Herbal. So stick around for another amazing hour right here on What She Said. October 18th marks Persons Day in Canada, a pivotal moment in history when women were legally recognized as persons, granting them the right to be appointed to the Senate and paving the way for gender equality. But as we celebrate this progress, it's important to remember that this decision didn't include all women. Indigenous women and women of Asian descent, for example, were still left out. Today, I'm speaking with Kadie Philp, founder of the Garden of Even, a platform dedicated to sharing the untold stories of women throughout history. Kadie's work questions the historical narrative that has often minimized or defamed women's contributions. I recently learned about her fascinating work and the power of storytelling in transforming the way we view women's history, so she joins me today to discuss Persons Day and the Garden of Even. Welcome to What She Said, Kadie.
Thank you for having me.
Persons Day is such a significant moment in Canadian history. So from your perspective, why is it so important to revisit and recognize this day?
Persons Day was really the beginning, number one, of gender equality in Canada, not just gender equality, actually all equality, because what it did is it actually restructured our entire legal system in the way that we interpret the law. And our legal system became what's called a living tree interpretation. So it meant that laws and words and definitions in the law had to change with the times. So in 1867, when the Constitution was written, women were not written in as persons. So 5 women challenged this, 50 plus years later saying, like, get with the times. We vote. We're members of cabinet. Like, we're persons. And then of course, the Canadian court said no. It went to the Privy Council in the UK, and they said, yes, of course, women are persons. This is Canada. Why? But what it did is it meant that definitions changed and applications and interpretation of law changed with time. So, we can thank same-sex marriage and spousal rights. That is rooted in the person's case, because now spouse no longer means a heterosexual couple. It can mean same-sex couples or any type of couple. So it really did transform and set the pace for gender equality and equality more broadly.
I really learn so much from you every time we talk, because I don't think I knew the significance of Persons Day until we had this discussion. So the Garden of Eden explores the idea of how history might have been different if women had been considered persons from the beginning. What sparked your passion to start this project, and what message are you hoping to convey through it?
This passion started, as I was a child, I was raised in the Judeo-Christian faith. A lot of us were raised with some form of religious narratives touching our lives, whether directly or indirectly. And even as a child, I remember asking, like, that's weird. Like, why didn't we celebrate Eve's hunger for knowledge? Like, what would have happened if we stayed in the garden infantile, just wandering around with no progression? So even as a young child, I was sort of rebellious, wondering and asking these questions. When I was introduced to Persons Day, it came across my desk somehow. I really did sit back and go, wow, like, what an impact. If we had have considered women persons from the beginning, the world would be so different, because their contributions would not have been downplayed or ignored or pushed out of historical narratives. So that really started this. And the intention is to bring focus to what has been intentionally defamed or written out because women did it. And to bring attention to and to highlight those accomplishments.
You've mentioned, obviously, that, from a child, you were sort of questioning about Eve and how other women have been misrepresented. So, beyond, as you grew and got older, how did you come to this realization, and what truths are you trying to highlight through the Garden of Eden?
That's a really powerful question, because I think you hit the point, is the realization I came to. And the realization is like coming to understanding that we have inherent value and worth as women, as people. Take gender out of it, as people, humanity has inherent value and worth. And unfortunately, we live in a system where that value and that worth is not recognized, depending on the type of person that delivers it, or does the innovation or the co-creation, whatever it is, right? So that to me was a major turning point, even in my own life, to say, wait a minute, like, I'm just inherently, like, great. And obviously we all struggle with that every day. I say that on the podcast, and and I'm like, yeah, and tomorrow I'll wake up and feel really terrible or whatever. Imposter syndrome. But that was really an intentional moment to say, but we're all full of greatness. And the Garden of Eden is meant to bring that out in stories that have been lost, and sort of flip the script on the stories. Like Eve, we do not celebrate her going on a hero's journey. Her contemporaries, in ancient, well, she's sort of a mythical character, but contemporaries in ancient Israel and ancient Egypt going on some massive hero's journey, we would applaud. We don't do that when a woman does it. We sort of label them as other or rebellious. So it's bringing back that essential truth, that all people are good, and especially what's been cast out as good from women, to bring it back into the narrative.
Let's talk about some other historical figures then, because aside from Eve, what are some of the most surprising or powerful stories you've uncovered in your research about women who've been misunderstood throughout history?
There are so many stories. So in my initial Garden of Eden program, there's 9 women, and they span from like Eve, which is sort of, I guess, the beginning of sort of like biblical time, but I wouldn't even say biblical. I chose her because her story is told in Judaism, Christianity, and Muslim faith. So like 55% of the world's population are exposed to these stories. So few of the women's stories do come from, they cross, the Quran, the Torah, the Bible, because there's just ubiquitous women we know. And we've all maybe heard of in passing. And then I started to move more contemporary with Joan of Arc. Her story is absolutely phenomenal. I spent the summer falling in love with her and getting to know her, reading about 10,000 hours of pages and film. to really get to know her story. And it's incredible. I'll be sharing it at an event later this month. And then moving even more contemporary to women like Olya Kolobanska. She was a leading, feminist revolutionary thinker. She's Ukrainian origin, but was occupied by Austro-Hungarian Empire, and really shifted the way in empirical thinking that women were thought of and treated. So there's thousands of stories, Candice. Like, I just feel so excited every time somebody recommends a woman to explore, to dive into and get to know more.
And storytelling is obviously a central element to the work that you're doing with the Garden of Eden. So how have your experiences in over 100 cities shaped your approach to sharing these untold stories of women? And why is the storytelling so transformative?
The most important thing I learned working across the globe, 100 cities, 30 countries, is that everything is open to interpretation. Perspective is exactly that. It's perspective. The world, we're in Canada. You're probably airing, maybe you have global listeners. There's very different worldviews around the globe. And we get so stuck in like our worldview thinking it's the correct one. And I think the biggest gift of me traveling and working is that there's so many worldviews. There's probably not a correct one worldview. To be open to hearing all the perspectives and the stories from different places, and really how stories enforce worldview. Because I would go into countries and I'd be told origin stories or stories that were very important to their cultural heritage. And I'm thinking, yeah, this is just a story that helps to perpetuate or communicate whatever idea is predominant in this culture. And I think that's a really actually empowering thought, because it means we can go back to these stories and apply a new lens. We can go back and say, well, what if Joan of Arc had been recognized as the first publicly litigated non-gender conforming person? 600 years ago, we had a woman refusing to identify as a woman, dressing as a man, and behaving as a man. And ultimately, turning around the 100 Years' War in France's favor, but called a heretic and a witch because she behaved like a man. Like, that's how different would 600 years of history had unfolded if a woman could have transformed herself and lived as a man 600 years ago, or vice versa, if a man could have transformed himself and lived as a woman. So I think it's such a freeing thing when you realize that, like, hey, this is just a worldview and a perspective, and we can think about it differently and we can interpret it in a new way.
And looking at, today's world where everything actually seems we're not as connected as maybe we used to be, how do you think the work of the Garden of Eden resonates with current social, political, and economic transitions?
Big question. I think that right now we are in a moment where people are challenging sort of cultural norms. They're challenging conventional wisdom. I think that's a better way of saying it, actually. Like, we have these sort of unwritten rules of conventional wisdom that people are now starting to say, what's that rooted in? Why do we believe that way? Why do we bow to that authority? Or why do we agree with that? Or why are we afraid to challenge? What happens when you challenge conventional wisdom? It's doesn't always work out, but I think we are in a moment, and it makes me excited, where people are starting to have those conversations, and we're much more open to it, because while we're losing some sort of like social cohesion, there's been those arguments. I think we also have so much diversity now, which is leading to new cohesion and new connection. I think that's what's scary for some people, is like, well, that old system is falling apart. Something new is coming. Something new is already there. So that's what the Garden of Eden is really trying to say, is we've built conventional wisdom around untruths, around stories that are framed and interpreted with a certain worldview. And now we have to challenge that conventional wisdom, challenge that worldview to say another version of the story is possible. And when we think of that version, new heroes emerge, heroines emerge, new values can come up to the front where we can live our lives in a more flourishing way.
So as we celebrate Persons Day, then, how can we continue to support and amplify the stories of women who are still often overlooked in history and even just in the present?
Mm-hmm. Pay attention. It sounds so simple, but pay attention. When you hear somebody criticizing, downplaying, defaming, dismissing, especially a woman or an equity-seeking group's accomplishment, like that should, why are we like, why? And ask always questions. Why? And is it true? Is that true about what we just said about that person or about that equity-seeking group? Like really challenge yourself to ask those questions. People can come out and come to my event to celebrate Persons Day on October 16th. It's in Toronto, also virtually around the globe if you're interested. You can go to gardenofeven.com/Persons Day. And it'd be a wonderful way to educate yourself on the importance of this event and this milestone, and hear some really interesting new stories and perspectives you may not have heard before, especially on Joan of Arc.
You know, I have to say I was at the first event you held, and, you know, you've completely changed my mind on certain things and informed me, like, for example, Jezebel.
Oh, yeah.
Was a always just a defamatory thing to say about somebody. Oh, she's such a Jezebel. But you have completely changed my view on her. And I don't want to spoil it because I really want people to go over and learn about her on your website and from you. So I do encourage people, but could you just quickly run through the women that you've really sort of broken down so they could hop over and take a look?
Yes. So I started with, like I said, a few women that cross, 55% of the population would have at least heard. That's Eve, the Queen of Sheba. Another one everyone's familiar with. Who do you think you are? The Queen of Sheba. Like, why would we use a defame? Anyway, read the story online. Queen of Sheba, Ruth and Naomi. Two other women, really interesting story interpreted as loyalty, but I interpret it as a much more interesting, empowering way. Lot's wife didn't have a name. She looked back, and her story is really about compassion. We've done Mary Magdalene because Mary Magdalene is a sort of ubiquitous. Dan Brown made her famous with the Da Vinci Code, and her story is phenomenal. Joan of Arc. Tahiri was a very early adopter of a very peaceful, beautiful faith called Baha'i faith coming out of Islam, and she was a martyr for it. And Olya Kolobanska, she was Ukrainian, fighting for nationalism and for women's rights. So it spans, from Eve to the 19th century, touching women in sort of different periods. Obviously, there are thousands of more stories to tell. I would love to work with people if they're interested to reach out to me, and I can build those stories. But you can read the stories that exist already online.
I can't wait to follow along for more and more of these stories as they come out. But in the meantime, Kadie, you have an event on the 16th. You have a website and social channels. So can you share some information about each of those for people looking for these things?
Absolutely. You can go to gardenofeven.com. And on Instagram, it's at Enter the Garden of Even. And you can find information about events. You can join. Signing up for my newsletter is a great way to figure out what I'm posting and next thing I'm up to. But also I share really interesting snippets of the stories that I'm working on.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Kadie.
Thank you.
Okay, now for the lightning round.
I'm so good at lightning rounds. That's from Friends. It's my favorite show.
20 seconds on the clock starts now. Who is the captain of the USS Enterprise?
Oh, crap. Is it Captain Stubing? No, Morgan? Crunch?
Next question. Which superhero is Tony Stark?
Stark. Did Game of Thrones have superheroes? I only watched 2 episodes.
What planet were Luke and Leia born on?
Planet Fitness?
Oh, time's up. Sorry. And now, a word from our sponsor.
Hey everybody, Mandy Kaplan here. Please check out my podcast, Make Me a Nerd, where each week an incredible guest tries to baptize this mainstream mom into the world of sci-fi, fantasy, and all things nerdy. Available wherever you podcast.
That's our show, folks.
Wait. I just thought of it. Padme Amidala gave birth to her twins Luke and Leia on Polis Massa. No, that's dumb. Is it Planet Hollywood?
Hi, I'm Michelle Davis, host of Maverick Makers. Every week, I'm meeting entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs who are making it happen. These bold thinkers are taking big risks, are trailblazing the way in their industries and lives, and are changing how things are done or made. You will learn about their journeys, their lessons learned, and their biggest Maverick moves to date. Listen to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or at maverickmakerspodcast.com.
It's time to find out what's new in entertainment with Anne Brodie. And this week, we're looking at two presidents back to back. Anne, I got to tell you, I don't even want to talk about this first one, but go ahead. Let's talk about The Apprentice.
Yeah. I kind of had to hold my nose before jumping into The Apprentice. Sebastian Stan stars as a young Donald Trump. And his father didn't have much use for him. He wasn't loving, didn't teach him. He was angry and abusive. So Trump found a father figure in Roy Cohn, a notorious lawyer who was one of the guys who put the Goldbergs to death. And he was an anti-communist, and he was on the law side of attacking and harassing so many people suspected of being communists. Anyway, he gave him 3 rules, and you'll watch the thing just to see these rules, because I'm not going to give them away here. It's just disgusting about how to get ahead. And it doesn't involve being helpful, being community-minded, having goodwill, anything like that. So Cohn was the starting point, and he was the one who taught him that you can't rent to blacks. So the NAACP sued Trump for not allowing blacks into his many apartment buildings. And so that was because of Roy Cohn. And I'm not sure how he felt beforehand. It doesn't really get into that. But another thing about Cohn is he had a basement recording studio where he had access to something like dozens of people's phones, and he would record their conversations without them knowing whether he was on them or not. Isn't that extraordinary? So this is the seed that created Trump. It's just out of this world.
So this is in theaters, Anne, and listen, I got to tell you, I can't even imagine paying to see this, and I won't watch it on TV either.
Yeah.
The day we never hear about this man again can't come soon enough. And so let's move on, because I would like to talk about Abraham Lincoln, which is fascinating to me because this is a story about him that I had never heard of before, but it seems like it's an open and shut sort of scenario.
Yes, it is. Well, Abraham Lincoln was gay. But, in his time, up until the 20th century, men and women had relationships, friendships, close bonds, and they were not frowned upon. There was a great tolerance for gender fluidity. It was considered nice that a girl had another girlfriend or a guy had a guy friend. And he slept with his cousins, with his best friends, and their portraits and paintings of these people. He had a real love of men. He did not like women. However, he was going to have to marry Anne Todd to help in his political campaigns. And so one of his lovers got married and assured him it was okay. Sex with women was survivable. So he went ahead and married her. But the doc really goes into the sort of history of sexuality over the eons, that, as I said, that it wasn't frowned upon, that it was when eugenics came along in the 1920s, and they decided to identify and type all these different kinds of people, races, sex, intelligence, and all of that, which created quite a bit of repression on all fronts. So that's where that happened. So fascinating stuff. I had never heard of it either. I don't think anyone had. And if you see the graphic on the website, the picture of Abraham Lincoln, he's got David Bowie's lightning slash through his forehead. Changes everything, right?
Yeah. And, honestly, Anne, I can't wait to watch this one because it looks fascinating, and not so much on Abraham's sexuality, because honestly, who cares? Like, who cares who he loved? Yeah. But really, what I'm most interested in is learning more about how we became so gender rigid. And a lot of that goes back to Freud. So I'm going to watch it based on that aspect alone. Really could care less who Abraham Lincoln loved in life, but it is interesting about the story of society and how we got here.
Study eugenics, EUGNICS. It's really nauseating. It's like the 2025 plan.
All right, let's move on because I want to talk about Ali Wong, single lady. She is so funny.
She's hilarious, but boy, she doesn't hold back. She's single now with a child, and apparently she's just been swept away by the number of men who are chasing her. And I don't know if it's true or not, and she doesn't say, but she says in her new single lady on Netflix that, I don't know how to talk about this. If a man performs certain sex acts on her immediately of his own accord without her asking, he's a keeper. She'll set him up in an apartment as long as he is always available to her. 40
She's
minutes.
She's pushing some boundaries for sure.
Yeah. And 40 minutes of praising the orgasm. And she says she's not looking for love. She's looking for a concussion. It's so funny. And it's so naughty.
She's really good at that. That's on Netflix, right, Anne?
It is indeed.
All right. I just quickly want to move on to a new series on CBC, Joan, which looks really fascinating.
It is terrific.
Looks good.
Sophie Turner plays Joan, who is a really smart, like a polymath, who is sort of down on her luck. And, she looks kind of tacky and she's got a 6-year-old daughter. Well, because of a violent ex-husband, the daughter's taken into care. So she has to find a way to get her out. And she's always dreamed of this big, rich life. So she decides to use her brains in an opposite function in order to sort of extract her dream out of society. So she changes her persona. She's suddenly very elegant, well-dressed. She speaks well, holds herself well, and she gets a job in a jewelry store. She's fascinated by the diamonds. The first night she swallows 4 and goes home. And this begins this woman's career as a jewel thief, and then she moves on to art thief. It's just riveting. And she's so darn good as this woman who's you can see her mind working, and she's able to change her persona on a dime, depending on the situation. So I'm sure there's people like that. But it sure is fun to watch.
Yeah, that one, the trailer alone, it's shot to the top of my list of my next must watch.
Absolutely.
So it looks really good. So you have all of these and more up on whatshesaidtalk.com, and we will see you next week. Thanks, Anne. True crime has always held a fascinating allure, and for many of us, it's about understanding the why behind unimaginable actions. Today, I'm joined by Christy and Melissa, the dynamic duo behind the Buried Motives podcast, where they explore chilling cases with empathy and curiosity. These longtime friends have not only patrolled their neighborhood as citizens on patrol, but they've also turned their love for all things creepy into captivating true crime storytelling. We're going to discuss what compelled them to start their podcast, the unique connection many women have with true crime, and the challenges of balancing respect for victims with the thrill of unraveling these dark tales. Welcome to What She Said, ladies.
Hi, thank you for having us. Great to be here.
So you both have a strong background in exploring the mysterious and creepy. So what motivated you to start the Buried Motives podcast?
It was a crazy idea that Christy had. It's a love that we both have always shared. And during COVID, we decided that it was something that we wanted to explore. And like most women, we are drawn to true crime.
Well, that brings me to my next question, because true crime is particularly popular amongst women. So what do you think draws so many of us to these stories, despite the often dark subject matter? And let's face it, we're often the victims.
We absolutely are. We have found that women do consume probably 80% of the true crime audience through, whether that be TV, videos, podcasts. And so women really are drawn to true crime. And there's a few different reasons for that. The first one is that many women feel that they can identify with the victims. Like you said, women are typically the victim of serial killers and murder often in general. And so women are quite empathetic and can connect with those victims.
I wonder if too, I mean, we're drawn to it out of empathy, but I wonder if there's a little bit of, do you think women are looking for maybe, how can I get out of this situation? Should I find myself in it? Like sort of a guide to escaping these realities?
Yeah, a listener beware.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We actually did ask some of our listeners on social media why they listen to true crime, and some of them did respond saying that exact same thing, that they want to be aware of the situations that are happening around them, what I need to be looking out for, what I can do to avoid them, and what to do if I am in those types of situations.
And I think it goes back to their relating to the victim. They see themselves as a potential victim. And so that's why they're looking for those tips.
I even know for myself, since we started this podcast, I'm way more aware of my situation. I'm way more skeptical of certain situations and people, what's that guy doing there? What's he got in his garage when I'm walking my dog? That type of a thing. And so I think absolutely as women, when we learn more about it, it helps to take a little bit of that fear out of it, that these aren't just monsters under your bed. That if we can understand how it's happening and possibly why it's happening, the motives behind it, it can help to give us some of that understanding and take some of that fear away from it.
Yeah, to make sense of the senseless.
Right.
There's comfort in that.
Investigating some of these stories must be intense. Have there ever been moments where you've creeped yourselves out so much that you're not able to continue? Or have you found a case so unsettling you're unable to sort of regulate your emotions on it?
All the time. There's lots of cases that we start and have to put on the shelf for a little bit and then revisit later on. There's cases that I know I've personally been researching for well over a year. And it's like, oh, I've had enough of that one right now. I need to go back to it later.
Definitely. And I have a few on my list that I just don't even think I will cover, because when I started researching, it's just too much even for me.
Balancing respect for the victims with the desire to tell their stories must be really difficult. How do you navigate this balance to ensure your storytelling remains sensitive and not sensational?
Sticking to the facts is one of the main things. A lot of the stories that hit the media are sensationalized so that they can get those views. So we really try to stick to the facts. And that includes digging deep and humanizing everyone in the story and making sure, I know we're always constantly sharing facts about the victims, who their families were, and trying to draw attention to not even just the victims, but other people's experiences that went through this tragic ordeal. So whether it's the first responders, the prosecutors, the judges, the juries, there's experiences had by everybody that's involved.
How do you decide on which cases to discuss in each episode? Are there particular stories that resonate more with you than others? Is it geographical? How do you determine what you're going to spotlight?
Well, we typically just cover solved cases because we want to know who this person is that committed the crime and why, how that happened. We also select cases that we can really find a lot of background information, because that is our goal, is to understand how this happened. We go into a lot of details. We do a lot of research. And so we're not just looking for headlines. We are really wanting to dig deep into these cases.
So the availability of information is something that guides which cases we choose. Sometimes we have families reach out to us asking us to share their case.
Oh, interesting.
Or their family member's case. Yeah. So sometimes that's how we choose. And sometimes it's just a gut feeling that we want to choose this case. We want to tell it.
Yeah. Sometimes for whatever reason, a particular case will resonate with us. I know there was a case that I did last Father's Day that actually broke my heart. And that was one of those ones that I cried through the whole process, and I just really connected to the victim, and I really felt drawn that I needed to share her story.
So that sounds like that was a pretty memorable podcast for you. Is it the most memorable, or what has been the most memorable one you've done?
Well, I don't know. We've done a lot of cases.
Yeah.
I think we've done over 160 cases now. And so I don't know if I can say that one has stuck out more than the other, but sometimes they move us in different ways. Sometimes they do break our hearts. Sometimes they anger us and frustrate us. Sometimes we talk about how they've brought up much needed change in even the legal system or how things were handled.
It is hard to pick just one case because the cases are so different. You can't just pick one victim that you want to talk about or highlight.
How much of what you are seeing in the news and on social media do you watch very carefully to see if it will be a potential story for your podcast? I mean, and as we're talking, we talked about this prior to recording, was this case that's exploding on TikTok right now where this woman has found this rug buried in her backyard and it looks like it's a body. And, you know, are you following this to say like this is a potential huge story for us to sometime cover? Because, you know, when it is solved, as you said.
Absolutely. I tend to follow those cases a lot just to see what's going to develop, what's happening with that. Another example of that was just recent is the Wade Wilson case. Because that one blew my mind because women are fawning over this man who brutally murdered women. And that's just a recent case that took place. He just got his sentencing. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to cover it, but I did follow it very closely on TikTok, in social media, because it was so widespread.
Yeah, I think that's a podcast unto itself, though. Like that whole women being drawn to these crazy men like Ted Bundy, Wade Wilson. These men are getting married in prison. I mean, honestly, you guys could have a spinoff just on that subject alone. It's so twisted.
We have made comments on previous podcasts about how do they get women to marry them in prison?
Considering the collaborative nature of your podcast, how do you maintain sort of a natural, engaging dialogue while sharing this really intense content? I mean, you must have to break a lot for some of the subject matter, I would think.
We actually don't break a lot.
It just is a natural flow with Melissa and I. Sometimes we take a minute to cry if that's what we need to get out. Sometimes we do take a minute and have a little snack if we need that, if we need a little sweet treat to get us through. But the dialogue flows quite easily with Melissa and I.
Yeah, it's like you're in the room just having a conversation. We're discussing the case amongst us. So one of us is telling the other one about it. And so it does just flow.
Right. Because we don't know what the other person is bringing to us when we come up to record.
Oh,
and so when Melissa's when Melissa's telling me her case, I haven't heard that case typically before, or at least all the details that she's going to bring me.
And she doesn't know the name of the dirtbag, or I don't know the name of the dirtbag that Christy is covering. So as the case unfolds, it's new to us. So you're hearing the honest reactions of what we're thinking about that case.
Right. And so it is similar to how we were talking right before we started to record about that TikTok case with the rolled up carpet buried in the ground. It's just a natural conversation for us.
What do you hope your listeners take away from each episode of Buried Motives?
That the experiences in the cases are had by real people. I think that would be one of our biggest ones. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's not just a headline in the news or on TikTok. This happened to a real person.
To a real family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point. You know, we do tend to almost dehumanize the people in these stories over time. They become less and less real to us and more of a sensational story. So I love that you are bringing that, humanizing them again for listeners and reminding them that they were real people with rich, full lives.
Absolutely. And even some of the stories of the dirtbags that we cover, some of them have had unimaginable childhoods and things occur in their life that it's almost hard to imagine that their life would have turned out any other way. And so we try to shed light on that as well, how this actually happens.
So what's next for your podcast? Any new directions or projects? I mean, I think we found one today. I mean, you do have to have one just about the women who marry these guys after they've been found guilty. There's one whole podcast. But honestly, what else? Is there anything else you guys are planning? New directions, new projects?
We're always hoping to venture into the next step in engaging with our audience and getting the courage up to do that. So getting some maybe live feeds going with our audiences so that we can get more interaction, because it's more fun for us when our audience is interacting. So doing some live stuff is definitely in the works and just working on that.
Christy and Melissa, I want people to be able to find your podcast and obviously keep up with you and perhaps recommend some stories you can pursue. So where can people do that?
Well, we have a website, buriedmotives.com. We are on all of the platforms that you can listen to a podcast on. And our name, again, is just Buried Motives. You can follow us on Instagram and on Facebook. We're quite active on there as well. So pretty much anywhere you look, you're going to find us.
Thank you so much for joining me today, ladies. It was a pleasure having you here.
Thank you so much for having us.
That's great. Thanks, Candace.
As cold and flu season approaches, and with respiratory infections like whooping cough and new COVID variants circulating, many of us are seeking ways on how to best protect ourselves and our loved ones. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Colleen Hartwick, ND, to discuss ways we can strengthen our immune systems, reduce the risk of infection, and help our families stay healthy during this challenging season. This conversation is part of an ongoing series sponsored by New Roots Herbal. Welcome back to the show, Colleen.
Thank you for having me back. I'm glad to be here.
I don't know about you, but I feel like I have a target on my back. Everybody around me is getting sick. So as we are not just preparing, but really in the thick of it, I think, for a cold and flu season, what are the most important steps we could take to sort of strengthen our immune system to prepare for these attacks, I guess, by viruses?
Yeah, absolutely. And I myself had my first bout of influenza over the weekend. It was pretty short-lived because you do a lot of the things right, but it is that time of year. So just starting with some of the basics for supporting the immune system. So these are things like making sure you get enough rest. That looks like somewhere between 7 to 9 hours of sleep every night. Doing your best to keep the stress level low, because we know when stress is chronically elevated, it can suppress the immune system and make us more susceptible to, the acute infections that are coming about this time of year. Getting some sort of movement on a regular basis. So whether that's going for a walk, for me, it's rock climbing, swimming, dancing. We know people who are regularly active tend to be better protected in the cold and flu seasons. And then, of course, diet plays a huge role. We are what we eat. Hippocrates was right. So making sure diet is rich in brightly colored fruits and vegetables. You're getting lots of protein because a lot of the cells of your immune system are made of protein. So making sure you're getting enough of that nutrient in your diet. And then considering, if you like them, fermented foods for all of those probiotics. We know people that have a healthier gut microbiome are also better protected against various different viral infections, colds, flu, and the like.
I have to say, of all the things that I have learned doing these interviews, thanks to New Roots Herbal, is how important the microbiome is. It is something that is now hammered into my head. We've talked about it so often, but I really hope people are paying attention to this because it is crucial.
Yeah, not just for immune health. You go and do any sort of deep dive into the scientific literature. Gut microbiome plays a role in mood, in immune health, in cardiovascular disease. It's so important to feed that gut what it nees.
Well, let's talk about the biggest little germ carriers out there, the kids who tend to bring home plenty of germs from school. How can we reduce the chances of illness spreading within our families, especially when the kids do come home with a sniffle?
Yeah, bless our children. They're back to school, so they're in more enclosed situations. I mean, we are as adults as well, less time outdoors, and just more of an opportunity to spread infections because unlike adults who have well-established immune systems, we've had decades of practice building immunity to various different pathogens. For kids, it's sometimes their first exposure, so they're going to be more likely to get sick with this year's cold virus or flu virus or variant of COVID. So I think some of the basics in terms of hygiene are really important, hand washing, making sure surfaces are clean, even something as simple and straightforward as, teaching the little ones and reminding ourselves as adults to cough or sneeze into your elbow, not in your hand, because a lot of these viruses are spread through respiratory droplets. So if I cough or sneeze in my hand and I go to touch you, increases the likelihood that I might spread what I have to you. So those are some sort of basic household practices that you can get into to play to help minimize spread. And of course, making sure, similar to your first question, that the little ones are getting enough rest, that they are staying well hydrated, they're getting some movement and making sure their diet is nice and diverse in terms of lots of different plants, brightly colored fruits and vegetables, help them better fend off any cold or flu virus they get exposed to while they're at daycare or school and the like.
What about the adults who are taking care of them? There's options, obviously, vaccinations, probiotics, supplements. Can you break down what you think are the most effective approaches for protecting ourselves?
Yeah. And so is this once you've been exposed or after you've already been exposed?
Well, let's say both, really.
Okay, so once you've already, so you're starting to get a little feverish, a little bit of a tickle in the throat, maybe a little bit of muscle pain because maybe we're dealing with flu versus cold. Some of my favorites are herbs, and my top favorite herbs for viral infections are herbs like elderberry, which we talked a lot about during COVID, still relevant and helpful for not just COVID virus, but a whole variety of different viruses. Another herb called yarrow is actually a fave of mine. It's antiviral. And what yarrow also helps to do is help us to actually spike a bit of a fever. And fever is really important for one, creating an environment that's not particularly hospitable to the growth of viruses and bacteria. Fever also helps to stimulate our immune system to create lots more white blood cells to help us fend off against infection. Echinacea has been one that's kind of been tried and true in terms of increasing white blood cell count. And again, making for a more robust immune army to, again, fight off against offending agents, viruses, and bacteria. And then there's some micronutrients as well, really important for both prevention, so decreasing the likelihood that we get sick initially, but can also be used if we do get sick. So these are nutrients like zinc, really important for the immune system. Vitamin C is an antioxidant, also lots of good research around it helping to decrease the intensity and the duration of things like colds and flu. And of course, the ever important vitamin D, which many of us, especially here, I live on Vancouver Island, so we are now in the gray, rainy months. So the vitamin D synthesis is less than it was a month ago when we were still in 25-degree and sunny weather. So making sure you're getting enough vitamin D, both for prevention, but even through the course of an infection, really important.
So nobody likes to be down for long, kids and adults. So is there anything we can do to help speed our recovery along? I know you've mentioned a lot of things once the illness hits, but is there anything else we can do to sort of hurry this virus out the door?
Yeah. So again, some of the nutrients that I mentioned just recently, so getting some extra vitamin D, zinc, vitamin C can help to speed up recovery time. Again, some of those herbs that I mentioned, like elderberry, English ivy is also really nice. It comes oftentimes as like a cough syrup. Various different medicinal mushrooms that I think we might have talked about,
we did, yes,
many months ago, many moons ago, like reishi, turkey tail, cordyceps can have antiviral effects and with that help to speed up recovery. And then listening to the body. Oftentimes when we're sick, we feel fatigued. So trying to listen to that, taking naps, getting enough rest for both colds, but especially for flus where we could spike a high fever, maintaining adequate hydration can really help speed up recovery. And one of my favorite things to, stay hydrated, but also support the immune system and again, help with a quicker turnaround time from illness to getting back to work or to school, is bone broth. Bone broth super rich in glutamine, which is actually an energy source. It's a fuel source for our immune cells, for our lymphocytes, the type of immune cells that help us to to fend off viruses and bacteria.
What about keeping people comfortable? Like, if they have a cough, should they be sitting up? What kind of things do you recommend for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So more on the symptom management side of the spectrum, which is also really important. So if we've got a cough, things like, actually dark chocolate is antitussive, so it can have a bit of a cough suppressing effect. So that's something.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I'll sometimes recommend to patients, not buying sort of the ultra sweet chocolate bar from the grocery store, but making like a homemade cacao from scratch to help suppress cough. We could look at steam inhalations using essential oils like eucalyptus oil that can help to really break up a cough. If there's sore throat going on, then things like honey, especially Manuka honey, which has some antibacterial, antiviral properties that can be nice and soothing for our dry, irritated throat. Lozenges like slippery elm lozenges can also be really nice to that effect too. If we're dealing with maybe a little bit of a deeper cough with like lots of mucus, phlegm that's maybe difficult to cough up, there's an antioxidant nutrient called N-acetylcysteine that can be great for that purpose. It's classified as a mucolytic, so it helps to break up mucus, make it easier to cough out that phlegm and give us a little bit of relief.
Getting through the season obviously is important, but we could probably be doing a lot to sort of think more longer term. So we're not repeating this every year and trying to, beat it back and, maybe just getting healthy in general. So any long-term tips for immunity and keeping ourselves resilient?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this comes up every year. I typically do a conversation like this in some capacity or the other, because sometimes we kind of forget what we did last season because, it's been 4 or 5 months since the last cold and flu season. So always good to have a refresher, and maybe it's just some take-home top strategies for supporting the immune system. So kind of going back to where we started is looking at sort of the overall architecture of your lifestyle. Are you getting enough rest? Are you incorporating movement? Where is your level of stress? Again, we know chronic stress can suppress the immune system and make us more susceptible to colds and flus. Are you getting enough key nutrients to help support the immune system? And some really important ones there are, again, vitamin D, which then you can get in supplement form. You can also get from foods like mushrooms or cod liver oil, rich in vitamin D, getting enough vitamin C. Another mineral called selenium, which is really rich in Brazil nuts. That also can be really helpful for bolstering up a good immune system, help to keep us protected from various different colds and flu viruses. Again, the fermented foods, the ever important gut microbiome, keeping that well fed with fiber, again, fermented foods and in a diversity of different plants. Really helps to support healthy gut microbiome. So those are some of the key pillars, I would say, to increasing the likelihood of making it through cold and flu season with very few sniffles and very few fevers.
Okay, thank you so much, Colleen. I have to say, you said some very big words in there that didn't quite compute in my head. So, and I'm sure listeners are probably going, what did she say? So I want to let everybody know that there's going to be a blog post about this on whatshesaidtalk.com, where you can go and read all of this. It will link out to some of the supplements that Colleen mentioned. And of course, if you're looking for New Roots Herbal products, head over to newrootsherbal.com to find a natural health food store near you. And Colleen, I will see you again soon.
Sounds good. And hopefully everyone can figure out what I said.
Thanks, Colleen. If today's podcast resonated with you, spread the word and share the inspiration. Don't forget to hit subscribe on What She Said across your favorite podcast platforms. Crave more? Join my vibrant community by signing up for my newsletter at whatshesaidtalk.com, and let's get social on Facebook, Instagram, and X at What She Said Talk. Dive into my world a little deeper on TikTok and Threads at Candace Said. And for those who love the airwaves, catch me weekly on 105.9 The Region, Blast the Radio, and 107.7 Pulse FM. Until next time, keep making waves and remember, your voice matters.
Hi, I'm Emily Roger, and I host a leadership show called The Boiling Point with my co-host, Dave Vale. Together, we sit down with trailblazing entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and movement makers who are driving meaningful change in our world. The show is all about exploring the lives and perspectives of leaders who are making a difference. Join us for insightful conversations that challenge the status quo, spark new ideas, and inspire you to take action. Find us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or at boilingpointpodcast.com.
I'm Jeff Woods, and I'm shining a light on music and the rock stars who make it.
He just was one of those people, he stood out.
He was a magic guy. He really was a magic guy. We all have faults. He had the same amount of faults as we all had.
This was before Led Zeppelin. Robert was full on. I mean, he was Led Zeppelin without the band behind him. He had the hair, the jeans, the whole thing, you know, and he was amazing.
The Records and Rockstars podcast, heard around the world and yours to hear wherever you get podcasts. All the episodes from jeffwoodsradio.com.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.